My stepmother smiled as she placed the plate in front of me. "Eat up," she said softly. "It's a special dish. I made it just for you." Her voice was warm, her smile was perfect. Too perfect. I forced a small laugh and thanked her, but my hands tightened around the fork. The room felt suddenly smaller, quieter, like the air itself was holding its breath. My father avoided my eyes. My younger brother kept staring at his phone. No one noticed the way my chest tightened, or the instinct screaming in my head that something wasn't right. The food looked incredible. It smelled fine, and that's what scared me most. Because after years of living under the same roof as my stepmother, I'd learned a painful lesson. When she went out of her way to be kind, it was never without a reason. So when she turned away to pour the drinks, I made a decision in a single heartbeat. I switched our plates. And in that quiet moment, I unknowingly stepped into the most dangerous conflict of my life. I never planned on moving back into my father's house. At 32, I had my own life, my own apartment, and my own carefully built distance from the woman who now called herself my stepmother. But life has a way of cornering you when you least expect it. A sudden layoff, a medical bill I hadn't budgeted for, and a father who sounded tired and relieved when he said, "Just stay with us for a while, Harper. You'll always have a room here." He didn't say her name. He never had to. Linda had married my father 6 years after my mother passed away. On paper, she was everything people admired, organized, polite, endlessly helpful. The kind of woman who remembered birthdays, labeled pantry shelves, and brought casseroles to neighbors who barely knew her. People loved Linda. Living with her was another story. From the moment I stepped back into that house, I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome before she even unpacked. Linda greeted me with a long hug and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "We're so happy you're here," she said. "This is your home." It didn't feel like it. My old bedroom had been transformed into a guest room. Neutral colors. No trace of who I used to be. My childhood photos were gone, replaced by framed quotes about gratitude and family harmony. Linda noticed me looking and laughed lightly. "Oh, I hope you don't mind," she said. I thought it was time for a fresh start. A fresh start. That was her favorite phrase. At dinner that first night, Linda took charge the way she always did, serving portions, refilling glasses, guiding conversation with practiced ease. My father, David, followed her lead, nodding along, avoiding conflict the way he had learned to do over the years. My younger half-brother, Ethan, barely looked up from his phone. "So," Linda said brightly, "how long do you think you'll be staying?" The question was casual. The message underneath it wasn't. "I'm not sure," I replied. "Just until I get back on my feet." "Of course," she said, smiling. Family supports each other. But later that night, as I lay awake in a room that no longer felt like mine, I realized something hadn't changed at all. Linda was still watching. Still managing. Still controlling every small detail under the mask of kindness. It was never the big things. Never shouting or obvious cruelty. It was the quiet corrections, the subtle reminders, the way she rearranged my groceries without asking, the way my father deferred to her even when it came to conversations between him and me. "You left the window open," she'd say gently. "That supplement might not be right for you," she'd suggest. "I made something healthier for you tonight. Always for you. Always framed as care." I told myself I was being sensitive, that I was stressed, that grief and pride made people imagine threats where there were none. But deep down, a familiar unease settled into my bones, because I had lived with Linda once before. And I remembered how, slowly and patiently, she made sure everything in the house revolved around her: rules, her timing, her decisions, her version of what was best. By the end of that first week, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't just a temporary stay. It was a test. And I didn't yet know what would happen if I failed it. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. That's what people like Linda count on, that you'll doubt your own instincts before you ever question theirs. She never raised her voice, never said anything that could be quoted back as cruel. Everything she did came wrapped in politeness, concern, and carefully chosen smiles. But the little things began to stack up. It started in the kitchen. I noticed my groceries never stayed where I left them. Protein bars I bought for myself disappeared, replaced with healthier alternatives Linda insisted were better for me. Teas I preferred were swapped out for blends she brewed every morning and insisted I drink. "I worry about your stress levels, Harper," she'd say. "This one helps calm the body." It was always phrased like advice, like care. Then there were the routines. Linda began keeping mental notes of everything I did. What time I woke up, whether I'd eaten, how long I spent in the shower. She asked these questions casually, but she remembered every answer. "You slept late today," she said one morning at breakfast. "I couldn't fall asleep," I replied. She hummed. "You've always been sensitive." I hadn't. Or at least, I hadn't been before I moved back in. My father noticed none of it. Or maybe he noticed and chose not to. Either way, whenever I tried to hint that something felt off, he brushed it aside. "Linda's just trying to help," he said. "She worries." So did I. But not in the same way. One afternoon, I opened the medicine cabinet to find my vitamins rearranged. The bottle I'd brought from my apartment was gone, replaced with a new one, same label, different brand. "I switched it," Linda said from the doorway. "This one absorbs better." "You should have asked," I said, keeping my tone even. She smiled. "I didn't think you'd mind." I did mind. That night, I started writing things down. Not because I thought something terrible was happening, at least not yet, but because experience had taught me that patterns mattered. Dates, small changes, conversations that left me unsettled. The more I paid attention, the clearer it became. Linda was always present when it came to what I consumed. What I ate, what I drank, what I took for my health. She never forced anything. She just hovered, waited, and nudged until refusing felt rude. One evening, I skipped dinner, claiming I wasn't hungry. The disappointment on her face was instant, barely hidden. "You really should eat," she said. "Skipping meals isn't good for you." "I'm fine." She watched me for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow then." The words sounded harmless. The tone wasn't. Even Ethan noticed something. "She's been really focused on you," he whispered one night when Linda wasn't around. "More than usual." That comment stayed with me, because I had noticed it too. By the end of the second week, the unease I'd tried to ignore had sharpened into something colder and more precise. I didn't know what Linda wanted, but I knew this much. She was testing boundaries, seeing how much control she could exert without being questioned, seeing how compliant I'd be, seeing how much my father would overlook in the name of peace. And the more I pulled back, the more attentive she became. By the time she announced that she'd planned a proper family dinner for the coming Sunday, something special, just for us, my instincts were already on high alert. I smiled and agreed, but inside, a quiet voice whispered a warning I couldn't ignore. Whatever Linda was preparing, it wasn't just a meal, and Sunday was going to matter. Sunday arrived wrapped in false calm. The house smelled different that afternoon, richer, heavier, layered with spices Linda rarely used. By late afternoon, she was already dressed, hair perfectly styled, moving through the kitchen with quiet confidence, as if this meal were a performance she'd rehearsed many times. "I wanted tonight to feel meaningful," she said when she noticed me watching from the doorway. "We don't sit together like a real family often enough." The word real lingered between us. My father came home early, carrying a bottle of wine Linda had specifically requested. Ethan even put his phone away without being asked. Everything about the evening felt orchestrated, like everyone had been assigned a role and given instructions I hadn't received. The dining table was set with care cloth freshly pressed, candles lit, her good dishes brought out from the cabinet she usually kept locked. She only used them for holidays, or moments she wanted to remember, or moments she wanted others to remember. "Sit here, Harper," Linda said, guiding me into a chair beside her instead of my usual seat across the table. Her hand lingered on my shoulder just a second too long. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Small talk, compliments about the food. Linda accepted praise modestly, brushing it off with a laugh. "Oh, it was nothing," she said. "I just wanted to do something nice." But I noticed she hadn't served the plates yet. Instead, she carried mine separately from the kitchen, holding it with both hands as if it were fragile. "This one is yours," she said, smiling. "It's a special dish." My stomach tightened. "Special how?" I asked lightly. She tilted her head. "You always ask so many questions." The others laughed. I forced a smile and took the plate. The food looked perfect, carefully arranged, thoughtfully portioned, the kind of meal that belonged in a magazine spread. I lifted my fork, pretending to admire it, but something deep in my chest refused to relax. Linda watched me closely. Not openly, not obviously, just enough that I could feel her attention even when I wasn't looking at her. "You've been under so much stress," she said. "I thought you deserved something comforting." "That's kind of you," I replied. My father raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To family," everyone echoed. I took a breath. The smell wasn't unpleasant. In fact, it was almost inviting. And that, somehow, made it worse. Because nothing about Linda was careless. She prided herself on precision, on planning, on anticipating needs before anyone voiced them. If this dish was special, it was special for a reason. I took a small bite. The taste was fine. Good even. No bitterness. No obvious warning. Yet the unease didn't fade, it sharpened. Linda smiled wider. "Good?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Very." She relaxed slightly, leaning back in her chair. Conversation drifted. Ethan talked about school. My father mentioned work. Linda chimed in at all the right moments, guiding the flow effortlessly. Anyone watching would have seen nothing but a peaceful family dinner. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being measured. Halfway through the meal, Linda stood up. "I forgot the wine opener," she said. "I'll be right back." She turned toward the kitchen. Time slowed. I looked down at my plate, then at hers. They were nearly identical. My heart began to pound, not with panic, but with clarity. A quiet realization clicked into place, built from weeks of small observations, careful notes, and instincts I'd been taught to ignore. This wasn't about kindness. It was about control. And suddenly, refusing to eat felt too obvious, too confrontational. Whatever Linda wanted, she wanted it to happen quietly, without resistance. So I didn't push back. I didn't speak. When she disappeared into the kitchen, I acted. My hands moved with calm precision as I slid my plate to the side and pulled hers toward me. No sudden motions, no noise. Just a simple exchange, hidden behind the flicker of candlelight. By the time Linda returned, smiling with the bottle in her hand, I was cutting into what had been her portion. She didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't expect me to do anything at all. "Sorry about that," she said, settling back into her seat. "Where were we?" "Family," my father said again. I nodded, lifting my fork. And as Linda took her first bite of what she believed was meant for me, I realized this dinner was no longer just about survival. It was about truth. And once it revealed itself, nothing in this house would ever be the same again. For a few minutes, nothing happened. That was the strangest part. The candles burned steadily. Cutlery clicked against porcelain. My father laughed at something Ethan said, unaware that the air around us had changed completely. I chewed slowly, forcing myself to look relaxed, forcing my breathing to stay even. Across from me, Linda ate with quiet confidence. I watched her carefully, not like a daughter watching a mother, but like someone observing a process, waiting for a result. Her movements were controlled, deliberate. She took small bites, dabbed her lips with her napkin, nodded approvingly at the flavor. "You did a wonderful job," my father said. Linda smiled. "I'm glad everyone's enjoying it." Had. Kaz temper as lakes and be as standing. Her eyes flicked toward me. "Especially you, Harper." "I am," I said, meeting her gaze. "It's comforting." The word landed between us like a test. She studied me for a second longer than necessary, then looked away. I felt a strange calm settle over me, not relief, but certainty. Whatever she expected from this dinner, she wasn't getting it the way she planned. Minutes passed. Then Linda shifted in her chair. It was subtle. A slight adjustment, as if she couldn't quite get comfortable. She set her fork down, then picked it up again. "You all right?" my father asked. "Of course," she replied quickly. "Just warm in here." She reached for her water, took a longer sip than usual. I kept eating. My pulse hammered in my ears, but outwardly, I was composed. I talked when spoken to. I smiled when appropriate. Inside, every second stretched, heavy with anticipation and dread. I didn't want anything bad to happen. That was the truth no one would ever believe. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want punishment. I wanted answers. I wanted confirmation that the quiet fear I'd been carrying wasn't imagined. Linda cleared her throat. "Harper," she said suddenly, her voice a touch strained. "You haven't been sleeping well, have you?" The question came out of nowhere. "I've been fine," I said. She frowned. "You seem tense." My father looked between us. "Linda, maybe." "I'm just concerned," she interrupted. "You know how sensitive Harper can be." Sensitive. The words scraped against me. I set my fork down and folded my hands in my lap. "I feel great," I said evenly. "Why do you ask?" She hesitated. Just for a moment. Then she smiled again, but the warmth was gone. "No reason." Another minute passed, then another. Linda pressed a hand lightly against the table. "I think I need to sit back," she said. "Just for a second." My father stood. "Do you want me to—" "I'm fine," she snapped, then immediately softened her tone. I'm fine. Probably just tired." She leaned back in her chair, breathing a little more deliberately now. Ethan glanced up from his phone, confused. "Mom?" "I said I'm fine," she repeated. I watched her carefully, every instinct alert. This wasn't about panic or shock, it was about control slipping. About a plan not unfolding the way it should. Linda hated uncertainty, and now it was written across her face. "Maybe we should call someone," my father suggested cautiously. Linda shot him a sharp look. "Don't be dramatic." I stood up. "I'll get you some fresh air," I said. "Maybe that will help." She looked up at me, eyes narrowing. "No," she said. "Sit down." The command was instinctive, unfiltered. My father stared at her. "Linda?" She realized what she'd done and forced a laugh. "I just don't want Harper fussing. She worries too much." I didn't sit. Instead, I walked to the sideboard and poured myself a glass of water, buying time, watching reflections in the glass cabinet. Linda's posture was rigid now. Her composure, so carefully built, was cracking. "I think we should slow down," my father said. "You don't look well." "I said I'm fine," Linda repeated, her voice tight. This time, I spoke. "Linda," I said calmly, "what exactly did you put in that dish?" The room froze. Ethan's phone dropped onto the table with a soft thud. My father turned toward me, eyes wide. "What kind of question is that?" Linda asked, laughing too loudly. "You make it sound like what?" I pressed. She stood abruptly, gripping the back of her chair. "Harper," she said through clenched teeth, "you're being inappropriate." My heart pounded, but my voice stayed steady. "I'm being careful." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Linda looked around the table, realizing for the first time that she no longer controlled the narrative. "I think we need to take a break," my father said. "This is getting uncomfortable." Linda swayed slightly. Just enough that my father reached out instinctively to steady her. "I don't need help," she snapped, shaking him off. But she did. And everyone could see it now. I stepped back, giving space, refusing to touch her, refusing to escalate. My mind was already moving ahead toward documentation, toward witnesses, toward what would come next. This wasn't a family argument anymore. It was an incident. And for the first time since I'd walked back into this house, the power had shifted. Linda looked at me then, not with false kindness, not with control, but with something raw and exposed. Fear. Whatever she had intended for me that night had failed. And as my father reached for his phone, asking whether he should call for help, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was only the beginning. Because once a mask slips, it never fits the same way again. The house didn't erupt into chaos. That surprised me. There was no shouting, no dramatic collapse, no scene anyone would later describe as unthinkable. Instead, the tension thickened into something heavy and undeniable, pressing down on all of us until even breathing felt deliberate. My father stood frozen near Linda's chair, his phone half raised in his hand. "I think we should call someone," he said again. Quieter now. "Just to be safe." Linda's eyes locked onto his. "No," she said sharply. "Absolutely not." Her voice carried authority, the same tone she used when bills were due, when decisions were made, when disagreement was no longer an option. For years, that tone had worked. This time it didn't. "Dad," I said gently, "it's okay to ask for help." Linda turned toward me, And for the first time, she didn't bother pretending. The smile was gone. What remained was calculation. "Harper," she said slowly, "you're overreacting." "I'm responding," I replied. "There's a difference." Ethan stood up, uncertainty written all over his face. "Mom, you don't look okay." That did it. Linda realized she'd lost the room. My father lowered his phone, conflicted, torn between the woman he'd chosen and the daughter he'd raised. I could see years of avoidance crashing into a single moment of responsibility. "I'm calling," he said finally. Linda's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. "Don't," she said. "You'll regret it." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. I took a step back, creating distance, giving everyone space to witness what was happening without interference. My heart was racing, but my mind was clear. This was no longer about me proving anything. It was about others seeing it for themselves. My father gently pulled his hand free and stepped away from her. "I'm making the call," he repeated. Linda stared at him as if she didn't recognize him anymore. While he spoke quietly into the phone, I moved through the room, doing what instinct told me to do. I took photos of the table, the plates, the untouched portions of food. I wrote down the time. I noted who was present and what had been said, not out of malice. Out of self-preservation. Linda noticed. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Protecting myself," I said calmly. She laughed, short and brittle. "From what? Me?" I didn't answer. Because answering would have turned this into an argument. And arguments fade. Documentation doesn't. The minutes that followed were slow and uncomfortable. A neutral voice on the phone asked questions. My father answered carefully. Linda sat rigidly, arms crossed, her composure partially restored, but something fundamental had changed. She no longer controlled the pace. Eventually, my father ended the call and looked at both of us. "They advised us to have her checked," he said, "just to be cautious." Linda stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I won't be treated like a problem in my own home." "No one said that," he replied. "But you're thinking it," she snapped, her gaze flicking to me. "She put this in your head." I met her eyes. "You did that yourself." Ethan left the room quietly, overwhelmed. I didn't blame him. Some truths are too heavy to witness all at once. Later that night, after things settled into an uneasy calm, I retreated to my room and locked the door. That was when I allowed myself to shake. Not from fear, but from the realization of how close I'd come to dismissing my instincts. How easy it would have been to stay quiet, to keep eating, to let discomfort pass for peace. I opened my notebook and wrote everything down while it was still fresh. Every word, every look, every shift in tone. Because I knew what came next. People like Linda didn't confess. They reframed. They denied. They turned concern into accusation and boundaries into betrayal. And if this moved beyond the house, if authorities, lawyers, or counselors became involved, I needed clarity. Facts. A record that couldn't be softened or rewritten. Down the hall, I heard Linda's voice, low and urgent, speaking to my father behind a closed door. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I knew the pattern. Appeal to loyalty, question my stability, reassert control. But something had changed in my father, too. For the first time, he'd seen what happened when Linda didn't get her way. And he couldn't unsee it. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the evening in quiet loops. I didn't know exactly what Linda had planned. I didn't need to. What mattered was this. I had listened to myself. I had acted without escalating. And I had ensured that, whatever came next, I wouldn't be alone or unprotected. This wasn't the end. But it was the moment everything stopped being private. And once a situation enters the light, especially the light of witnesses and records, it never returns to the shadows the same way again. The next few days moved slowly, but the truth moved fast. Not loudly, not dramatically. It didn't explode into accusations or screaming matches. Instead, it gathered quietly, patiently, like water seeping into cracks no one realized were there. Linda became careful, too careful. She stopped hovering, stopped offering me food or drinks. She spoke less at the table, watched more. Her kindness didn't disappear, it sharpened, became strategic, measured, as if she were recalibrating after a misstep. My father noticed. I could see it in the way he studied her now, The way his answers to her questions grew shorter. He didn't confront her. He didn't need to. Something in him had shifted from trust to vigilance, and once that line is crossed, there's no going back. I didn't push. I didn't provoke. I stayed calm, polite, observant, and in the quiet, the house began to reveal things Linda could no longer control. The first confirmation came from outside the family. Rachel Collins, my father's longtime friend, and an attorney stopped by one afternoon to check in. Linda had suggested the visit herself, eager to appear cooperative. I watched her perform concern with impressive precision. Rachel asked neutral questions, simple ones. How's everyone holding up? Anything unusual lately? Have there been changes in routines? Linda answered smoothly. Too smoothly. When Rachel and I were briefly alone in the hallway, she lowered her voice. Harper, she said, I need to ask you something directly. I nodded. Do you feel safe here? The question landed harder than anything Linda had said. Yes, I answered carefully. But I'm being cautious. Rachel studied me. That's a good instinct. Later that evening, my father asked me to sit with him in his study. The door was closed. The tone was different, no longer defensive, no longer dismissive. I've been looking through some things, he said quietly. My chest tightened. What things? Financial records, household expenses, changes Linda made that I never approved. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside were printouts, emails, account statements, notes I hadn't seen before. Linda had been redirecting mail, making small financial adjustments under the guise of efficiency, scheduling appointments on my father's behalf without telling him. Nothing illegal on its own, but together, it formed a pattern. She said she was helping, he said, voice unsteady, that she was easing my burden. She was managing outcomes, I replied gently, not people. He looked up at me, eyes red. I didn't want to see it. I know. That was the moment the truth stopped being theoretical. It became personal. Over the next week, more pieces fell into place. Ethan admitted hesitantly that Linda had told him not to worry about me, that I was emotional, that I misinterpreted things. She'd asked him to keep an eye on me, to tell her if I skipped meals, if I seemed off. He looked ashamed when he told me. I didn't think it was bad, he said. She said she was protecting Dad. She was isolating him, I said quietly, and controlling the narrative. The hardest revelation came last. Rachel called us in for a formal conversation. Linda wasn't invited. There are enough indicators here, Rachel said, folding her hands, to justify protective steps. My father's face drained of color. What kind of steps? Boundaries, she said firmly. Documentation, and potentially legal separation of responsibilities. Linda had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, not in one dramatic act, but in accumulation, in intent, in the quiet confidence that no one would challenge her authority. When my father confronted her that night, I stayed in my room. I didn't need to hear the words. I heard the tone. Her voice controlled, then sharp, then wounded. His tired, steady, finally resolute. No yelling. Just the sound of something unraveling that had been held together by silence for too long. Later, he knocked on my door. I'm sorry, he said simply, for not listening sooner. That apology mattered more than any accusation. Linda moved into the guest room the next day. Temporary, she said. Just until things calm down. But control doesn't survive scrutiny. Rachel drafted formal boundaries. Financial access was restricted. Medical decisions required consent. Communication was documented, not punishment protection. Linda didn't rage. She didn't cry. She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. And for the first time since I'd returned to that house, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not victory, clarity. Whatever Linda had intended, whatever she believed she could orchestrate it, had failed the moment I chose awareness over comfort. The truth hadn't rushed. It had waited. And now that it was fully visible, there was no version of events where it could be put back in the dark. What remained was the final confrontation. Not with anger, with accountability. And I knew it was coming. The confrontation didn't happen the way movies show it. There was no slammed door, no raised voices echoing through the house, no dramatic confession. It happened on a quiet Thursday morning, when the house felt almost peaceful again. Linda asked to speak with me alone. I think we should clear the air, she said, standing in the doorway of the living room. For the sake of the family. The phrase made my stomach tighten. I agreed anyway. We sat across from each other on opposite ends of the couch, a coffee table between us like a line neither of us would cross. Sunlight poured through the windows, exposing every detail, the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers twisted together in her lap. For a moment, she just looked at me. You've always been difficult, she said finally, her tone calm, measured. Even as a child. I didn't respond. She leaned forward. You see threats where there are none. You take concern and turn it into accusation. Concern doesn't need control, I replied. Her lips tightened. You don't understand what it takes to hold a family together. I understand what it costs, I said. That's when the smile slipped. Everything I've done, Linda said sharply, I did for this family. For your father. You did it for authority, I said. Not care. Her eyes flashed. You think you're smarter than me? I think I'm finally listening to myself. She stood up abruptly, pacing the room. You came back into this house and disrupted everything, she said. Your father was fine. Ethan was fine. And then you arrived with your notebooks and your suspicions. I remained seated, calm, grounded. You built a system where no one questioned you, I said. And when someone finally did, you called it instability. Set to mock it. She stopped pacing. Be careful, Harper, she warned quietly. People won't believe you. They never do. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about the dinner, or control, or even fear of exposure. It was about power. You're right, I said softly. They didn't believe me. At first, her eyes narrowed. But they're paying attention now. She laughed. Short, bitter. Because you made a scene. No, I said, because I didn't. Silence stretched between us. I kept records, I continued. I didn't accuse. I didn't escalate. I documented. And now professionals are involved. Her face drained of color. What professionals? She asked, too quickly. Legal, I replied. Medical, financial. She took a step toward me. You wouldn't. I already did. The room felt smaller, heavier. You're destroying this family, she whispered. I'm protecting myself, I said. And my father. Her composure shattered then, not into rage, but desperation. You don't know what it's like to manage everything alone, she said, voice shaking. To make decisions no one else is strong enough to make. You decided you knew better than everyone else, I replied. That's not strength. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. My father stood there, having heard enough. Linda, he said quietly. This conversation is over. She turned to him, stunned. You're choosing her? She demanded. I'm choosing clarity, he said. And boundaries. Her eyes moved between us, realizing there was no ground left to stand on. This isn't finished, she said, her voice cold again. You'll regret this. I stood up. No, I said. You will. Rachel arrived that afternoon. So did paperwork. Not dramatic, not cruel, just firm. Linda was informed calmly, professionally of the steps being taken. Restricted access, required evaluations, legal counsel recommended, temporary separation of living arrangements. She didn't argue. She knew arguments no longer worked. As she packed a small suitcase, she avoided my eyes. The woman who once controlled every detail of this house now moved carefully, quietly, like someone navigating unfamiliar territory. At the door, she paused. I tried to help you, she said, without turning around. You tried to control me, I replied. She left without another word. The house felt different that night, lighter. My father sat at the dining table long after dinner had ended, hands folded, staring at the space where Linda used to sit. I should have listened sooner, he said. You listened when it mattered, I replied. And for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. Not because everything was resolved, but because the truth had finally been spoken out loud, and once that happens, power changes hands. The story wasn't over yet, but the most dangerous part was behind me, because the person who smiled and said, "Eat up, it's a special dish," no longer had a seat at the table, and she never would again. In the weeks that followed, the house slowly became quiet in a different way. Not the tense, watchful silence that had wrapped itself around every conversation, but a calm, honest quiet. The kind that comes when nothing is being hidden anymore. Linda didn't come back. The legal steps my father took became permanent. Responsibilities were clearly defined. Boundaries were written down instead of implied. For the first time in years, decisions were made openly, with consent and documentation, not control disguised as care. Ethan relaxed. He laughed more. He stopped looking over his shoulder, and my father, my real father, began to feel like himself again. He asked questions. He trusted his instincts. He apologized more than once, not out of guilt, but out of growth. As for me, I didn't leave right away. I stayed long enough to make sure the system protecting us was solid. Long enough to know that if I walked out that door, I wouldn't be leaving chaos behind me. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing. When I finally moved out, it was on my own terms. I didn't feel angry. I felt proud. Proud that I listened to the voice inside me when it whispered instead of screamed. Proud that I didn't need proof of harm to justify protecting myself. Proud that I chose clarity over comfort. What happened at that dinner table taught me something I'll never forget. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it says, "Eat up, it's a special dish." And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is pause, trust yourself, and quietly refuse to play the role someone else has written for you. I didn't win by confronting her. I won by seeing clearly, and by choosing myself before it was too late.